Okay, so the motion of today is that this house will be national DNA database. First of all, let's take a look at why we have the motion here, some background information to introduce this motion. We know that due to the urbanization, the international urbanization in a lot of countries, the mobility of the national population has become bigger than before, and we know that crime just come up with this trend. The crime has also become more mobile than before. The liquidity of the population has increased, and we know that it will be very difficult to keep track of the criminals in the cases when there is a long distance, when the criminal has escaped from one place to another. At the same time, we know that it will cost a lot of money to keep track of the criminal. If there is a long distance involved in here, it will cost the transportation fee of the police from one place to another. At the same time, it will cost the cooperation between two different police stations. So the cost of the cooperation of the personnel will also be big. At the same time, the way that the criminal will offend the crime has also developed with the advancement of technology. We know that nowadays it becomes much more easier for those criminals to change their identity and change their facial identity and change their identity card. This is especially true in China. And so we believe that the way that we keep track of the criminal should also be developed with advance of this case. So I don't think there's much for us to define, because we know what is the database. But here I want to declare that we want to establish the DNA database incrementally, step by step. We will not push it. We will not push it to exist. And we know we will not give up the traditional ways to keep track of the criminals at the same time. Okay, and a point?
Who exactly are you screening? Every single citizen in the country? PRs, employment pass holders?
Okay, I get your point. You're doubting the possibility of this. So I have said that, I have declared that this DNA database has to be created, established step by step. We were trying to get access to the people that is feasible for us to get access now, and we will enlarge the population in the future, step by step. Okay, so begins my points now. So the first point I want to talk about is this policy really necessary? It is necessary for us to build a national DNA database. Of course it is. First of all, we know that the traditional ways to keep track of the criminals has lost its way, has already lost its function. We know usually we can have the facial recognition by the officials, and also we can have the crime motivation analysis of the case. But now we have seen that it's very easy for people to do a cosmetic surgery, to change their face, and at the same time, the motivation of the criminals has also become more complicated than before. So it is very hard for us to use traditional ways to analyze it. So that's why we think advance of the technology to keep track of criminals is necessary. At the same time, the long distance crime, the people will transfer from one place to another due to the development of the transportation means also has had difficulty to keep track of the criminals. So, and also the international, although this is a national DNA database, we know that in a lot of Western countries, the people has already had the idea to build up the DNA database. So other countries should also just cooperate and respond to this case. So it will be easier to cooperate between different nations. And my second point is that it is really feasible, and I will talk about feasibility in two levels. The first one is it is economically sound, and secondly, will it offend people's sensitivities? And first of all, I think it will totally be economic. We know that the money spent in this technology, in keeping track of the DNA database, will not cost so much. We know that you can just set many spots in the communities and ask people to go there and leave their DNA. So it's not very hard. All you need is the sports, and all you need is a very big hard disk to keep information in the computer. It's not so hard. But the money spent in keeping track of the criminal, the long distance, the transportation fee, and the cooperation between even the not so good cooperation between police station will be much more. Will totally overweigh the money we spend in this technology. And also we know that will it offend people's sensitivities? No, we don't think so, because we know before, if we want to get the DNA sample of the people, we have to get the blood from them and their semen and their human juice from them. So it will maybe offend their sensitiveness because from some race people think that blood is very sacred. But now all we need is just to keep your each finger tissue. All you have to do is to put your finger on a very small piece of cut and leave some cell on it, and we'll know what is your DNA. And the third point is that, okay, I'll take a point first.
Who would have access to this DNA database?
Okay, I believe that if we set a place in one country, you can set the sports in those communities, and the people with an ID card will have the access to this different sports in the community, and it is compulsory, and I think they will do it. It will not cost their money. It is not hard, and they know it is protecting them. They will do it. And my third point is that will it ease the situation? Will it make the situation better? Of course it will. We know that first of all, on the corporation level, it will be much more easier. All you need is to get on the internet and search the database, and you will know the DNA of the criminal. At the same time, the time will save a lot. And we know that time is a very important factor in keeping track of the criminals. So if this factor is covered, I believe that keeping track of the criminals will be much more easier. We have a big step of development. At the same time, the DNA is not something people can change, as I said before. That you can change your identity, you can change your face, your look, but you can never change your DNA. So this is a very good way for us, and a very countable way for us to rely on it. And the last is that it will better keep track of the record of the criminals, so we can keep them from re-offending the crime again. So based on all these points, I believe I have said clear about whether the DNA database is feasible, is economical, will it offend somebody's rights? Of course it will not, and it will totally solve the problem, solve the emergency of traditional ways of keeping track of criminals that cannot cover it before. And the second speaker will discuss more the process and details of it. Thanks.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Thank you, Prime Minister. I invite the Leader of Opposition here.
Speaker, ma'am, we say that there's a big problem today because Thai government is setting up a very big solution, a very contentious solution, and a solution that would actually infringe heavily on privacy for very unclear reasons. Because the reasons they've given us is that, with urbanization, there's greater mobility, this increases crime, and there is a difficulty of tracking criminals across distance. Firstly, let's look at whether there is a current mechanism for tracking crimes across this great distance or across countries. We say that there is a current system, which is the Interpol sharing system, which shares information on criminals who are considered a global threat to all nations across borders. So we say that there is this mechanism to allow for tracking of information, to allow for sharing of information across borders. We say that that is probably already sufficient. On the second level, they talk about how there is a high cost of evidence transfer. We say that that is also very questionable on their model, because they told us how this DNA database would just be a fundamental level. It would not be the sole evidence used to incriminate people. So in that situation, in their model, these traditional ways would still have to be used. And if there were a high cost of evidence transport, it would still exist in their model. But on a second level, this evidence transport, we are not clear about what type of evidence that you need to transport in status quo, because if it's just documents, sharing of information that is gathered, it can be transferred through intranet system, for example, through the computers online. We don't think there would be a very high cost. So that reason for their model is questionable. Lastly, we talked about how it's easy to change identities or appearances. We said that on the first level, this has been existing from time immemorial. Like criminals have always probably looked at changing their appearances, even through disguises or whatever. So the police has adapted to this situation from a long time ago. We do not see why there's a great change, this momentous change in status quo that would merit such a big step taken by the police. On the second level, the changing of appearances that they talked about, like for example, cosmetic surgery, would likely be a very minority of criminals looking into this, and we do not see this as being a very big problem that would warrant such a big change in terms of dragging the whole population down. So let's look at how they talked about whether this policy is necessary, right? Because they talked about how the traditional ways are inefficient. We've shown you how there are systems already, for example, the Interpol, for example, through methods they've adopted through the different times. But on top of that, we talked about how this is a very big issue in terms of privacy, and how it is necessary for them to prove that there is a great burden or great damage caused in status quo to warrant such an issue. Because they talked about how they told us how this system is compulsory and how everyone has access. So let's look at that. Because when you have everyone has access. So let's look at it in terms of the right to privacy. When you make it compulsory for people, on the first level, it is a problem in terms of the on the right to bodily autonomy, because DNA information is very unique to each individual. It's something that's distinct for every single person. As such, it is basically something that identifies you as a person, and this makes it something that's highly personal. That people have been allowed a choice of what to do with their body in a lot of situations. For example, your abortion situations, when you decide what to do with when you are given the right to choose what to happen when something in your body. In a lot of situations, we are giving this right to people because we recognize that this is something that is highly integral and something that is highly personal to them. So we see that this is a similar situation. And on the second level, we look at how people have this right not to incriminate themselves under based on crimes, and how there is our pillars of our justice system does enshrine the right to innocence until proven guilty. A good example would be the American system, the Miranda system, in which people have the right to maintain silence if they feel that speaking out would further incriminate themselves. This recognizes the right of people to maintain their silence when they believe that they do not want to further contribute to a case against them. So we say that that is a current situation. On the second level, we look when a DNA evidence is used as something that would help turn the crime, we say that there's a danger there, because even though it might not be the pivotal change or the pivotal step in the case, there is that psychology there that if in a rape situation we see a DNA of blood traced by this one person and we recognize that person, there is the psychological push for these police to just narrow the investigation down to just investigating that one person. We said that is very problematic because it would narrow the scope and there would be a problem. But before we go on,
okay, it is a push. It is better to find the offender than the push. Don't you think so? The push for the psychological, kind of the emotion.
Okay, so we say that in the justice system there is a need to find the criminal, the right criminal, when there is this push, this psychology that, just because there is the trace evidence, it's a high chance that this person might be the one. So there would be a narrowing of the investigation down to this one key suspect. We say that would harm the criminal justice system because it would narrow the scope of the investigation. There would be high chance that these people would not consider other issues outside of this, and it might lead to the wrong person being incriminated. Lastly on this argument, we talk about how in status quo there is a need for a warrant before you ask for DNA evidence, because we enshrine the need to have a probable cause. We don't just infringe your individual right to privacy just for any situation. We really do it when there is a high chance that this might be needed, when there's a high chance that you might be the criminal, and that's why you need warrants in status quo to get DNA evidence. Lastly, the last argument will be on how this would actually increase. This is actually increasing of surveillance, and how this would actually infringe further on privacy and would lead to problems. But because of all this, we are very proud to oppose.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I want to answer a question from the opposition side. Who have the rights to access to the DNA database? Of course, the police, and supplemented by the authorized organizations of the government. So here is the answer. And first of all, I'd like to do some rebuttals against the opposition side. The first one, that is the infringement on privacy. You mentioned a lot about the DNA database would be an infringement on the privacy. But we can see the traditional ways of blood testing or such kind of the fingerprint, which is much more offensive for the people to do the things once and once again when they are doubted as the criminals. So that is really very repeated for, and it is really offensive behavior for the ordinary people. And second rebuttal, that is mechanism of the tracking information, because you mentioned a lot about that the different countries have the different mechanisms for tracking information, and later please, and for tracking the criminals. So we can allow and we can abide by the mechanism. That is true, but we can see that there are a lot of the trafficking, and there are a lot of the international crimes. So it is really very hard for the different countries to only use the mechanism, the old mechanisms. If most of the countries build up their national DNA database, it is much better to cooperate with each other. As for the international affairs, later please. And next, that is the transportation phase. Yeah, our first speaker mentioned a lot about the costs of the effective costs of if we set up the DNA database. Because if we set up the DNA database, it will be effective method to track crimes. Because we know that the human resources, the money investment, and the relationship linkage would be a huge, heavy load for the police to track the criminals, and this kind of will be a complicated relationship between each other. So we know that especially from the province to province in our own country. So in this way, we know that the transportation fee is only just an example of this kind of the exaggerating the fee usage, and we know that we can cut the budget to other aspects for the country. And next, that is the necessity. We know that traditional methods are still, later please, are still effective in a small scale. For example, in a small community, you can use the traditional methods to track the criminals, to find out who commits the crimes. But in the whole country, how can you only use the traditional methods to find the criminals in the shortest time? So that is really efficiency and effectiveness. And the last rebuttal, that is individual and secret thing for the people to hold their own DNA database. Okay, the DNA database is built, authorized by the governments, and the police will keep the secret. When they find the criminals, they will not disclose to the public. They will keep the secrets, and they will track the criminals in a better way. Okay, I'll take a point.
Prove to us how DNA tracking or DNA databases are going to help find out investments, relationships, and all the other links to your crime that you want to solve.
Okay, later. I knew your points, but you misunderstood my points before. I said that the traditional ways of find the criminals involve the elements of the large human resources and money investment, because you need to find the criminals in another province. You should pay for the cost. You should contact with the police in another province. So this kind of the relationship linkage are very huge. So in this way, we should build up the database. Here I want to declare some, later please, I want to declare some points here. We know that the building up the DNA database would be a good way to protect the rights of the ordinary people. Not every people will be some kind of the people who committed crimes. So we know that the blood testing is still a using way nowadays, but this kind of the offensive way should be prohibited to some extent. So the disturbance for the ordinary people and maybe will make some the scary and violation for the ordinary people in some situations. But once the DNA database is set up, it can be used conveniently for tracking the crime offenders without disturbing and requiring each time when they find some kind of the crimes suspicious people. And we know there's an example because once in an interview in China, and the boy said that he was really very humiliated by just being doubted as a crime offender, because he should be he should go to the police to accept this blood testing, but he is not the people who commit crimes. This kind of the justice should be equal to every people, into the ordinary people. So when we set up the DNA database, this kind of the humiliation scenery will be cancelled. And the second point I want to declare, that is a need for the future development. We know that with the increasing development of urbanization nowadays, initially more migrant workers flushed to cities. So it is really very hard to track. So make crimes. Most of the migrant workers will make crimes and leave. It is very hard for the police to track their information. So a database will be a good way for them to track the migrant workers' information and find out the effective ways. And additionally, more organized crimes spring up nowadays. So national security should be given priority too in this situation, because we know that a lot of the national security problems are very hard to track, because this kind of the organized crimes, this kind of the organizations are really very supervised, are really very leader by the very talented people. So the DNA database will be set up to solve this kind of the problem in the most efficient way. Thank you.
Madam Chair, I should talk to you about how this entire policy from side government essentially violates and undermines the justice system on the first level, and on the second level, how it's increasingly going to set the precedent for increasing government intervention into the private sphere of every citizen under its jurisdiction. But before that, let's take a look at what exactly came out from side government, because on the first level, they say that this DNA database is predicated upon the fact that it's going to stop crime, and in this crime itself, they have a couple of different definitions, right? They initially say that, people who are on the run from the law, or then it could be criminal organizations, or it could be, people who have committed crimes, and then, you're trying to stop people from committing crimes. Fine, it's a very, very, great sentiment coming from side government, but our question is very simple. How is DNA going to help you, keep track of these people? Essentially, what they are proposing is to tag these people like cattle, and then to make sure that through some kind of sophisticated GPS tracking system, you know exactly where they are, and then you find them. Essentially, how does DNA, which is nothing more than, a vital part of your body which you need to cross-check with other, different pools and banks of DNA, how the hell is that going to help you find these criminals in the first place, right? Because essentially, if we are going to consider their paradigm in place, then what they are suggesting is that the various countries who are going to participate in this is then going to screen every person entering their borders for their DNA, and then cross-check it against an existing bank of DNA, and then say, oh no, wait, I think you're innocent, you may enter the country. What this essentially does is brings about a whole raft of diplomatic issues, not to mention the kind of, the kind of humiliation and the absolute transgression into the private spheres of these people. They told us how a single boy felt when he had to have his blood blood tested to see whether he was a criminal or not. Now imagine every single person, say in the Eurasian sphere, who's going to be tested just to see whether or not they're guilty or innocent.
Yeah.
That's the scope of the problem we see from side opposition, and we see that essentially as any kind of willful government who looks out for the best of their people, this isn't something which we should mandate at all. So then moving on to the fact that how traditional or rather contemporary methods of tracking criminals is absolutely inefficient, we say that that's rubbish to begin with, because it is an assertion firstly to say that increasing urbanization is the reason for increasing crime. We say if that's your problem, then please tighten your immigration laws if you want to say that immigrants are the big problem. If anything this is a problem solution mismatch, and it came out too late instead of the Prime Minister, and we don't know what the hell you're talking about. And secondly, if anything, and the fact remains that these countries are probably depend on, say, the immigrant population to come in and actually, boost their economy. What this essentially does is to push them away from the country simply because they know that they're going to have some kind of presupposition of guilt on them from the national security services of that country or the government of that country, and if anything, it's only going to be detrimental for that country in the first place. No person is ever going to abide by these laws at all. Then, moreover, let's look at these kind of tracking mechanisms which they say is completely ineffective. Firstly, there is no logical link or any kind of analysis as to why this has been ineffective, seeing as Interpol has been one of these bastions of international law. The fact remains that different police organizations are in close contact. They have an international criminal database based on fingerprinting, based on facial recognition systems, and so on and so forth. We think that even if cosmetic surgery is going to be absolutely the most technological advanced thing that this person is going to do, a simple fingerprint test is probably going to be enough to track him. We think that simplicity is what is going to really serve the purpose here. We don't think the DNA tracking is really going to enhance any kind of security issues. And lastly, if cost is going to be the biggest problem, efficiency and cost, and the fact that this, if another province or another government really shouldn't allow another proxy government to help them, then we say let them bear the cost. I'm sure they'll do it quite happily if it's going to lead them to the criminal whom they're seeking so desperately. So we think that from side opposition, none of their benefits stand, and also there's a whole raft of harms coming out of their policy you just cannot go through. But then let's really look at how this violates the kind of rights, violates the entire justice system which you're talking about. The fact is, any law system in the developed world, and increasingly in the developing world, assumes every person to be innocent until proven guilty. What essentially they're doing by cross-checking their DNA against a bank of people is presupposing guilt, Madam Chair. And the fact remains that under status quo, to get any kind of DNA information, or for that matter, even to get the fingerprints or the blood samples of these people, you need to show probable cause. And that's something which is being extremely violated in this situation. My first speaker talked about how the privacy and the autonomy of the body which we accord to these people is extremely important to these people, how it's very inherent to their being. And the fact is, you're simply violating that based on the fact that they might be guilty, and without even letting them know what they're being charged for. And we tell you that is the greatest problem which comes out from side opposition. What essentially happens then is that every person is going to live in an environment of, you see, I don't know where I might have been, maybe a crime happened there, my DNA is going to come up, I'm not going to be caught and charged as a criminal, and there's no way that he can actually fight against the system. Because the policy which they're basically putting forward is DNA is the absolute paramount piece of evidence needed to convict you. And if this is going to be the case, any person who has been anywhere near the crime scene is one, not going to be given the chance of a fair trial, and two, is going to be made a criminal. We really don't think that this is the kind of police state we want to promote in a Western liberalized democracy, and we don't think that this is something we should go ahead. But yes, before I move on.
Okay, once the DNA database is set up, it can be used for a long time. So don't you think that it is really effective way to cut the budget and cost?
What budget, what cost are you talking about, firstly? And secondly, if you want to track, say, the 500 million people in the United States of America, I assure you, even if they have to come and place their finger on a piece of cardboard, it is going to still cost a lot of money. So your efficiency and your budget cost is going to fall on the second level. And on the third level, of course, how are you going to track these people? And if you are going to do it, you're still going to essentially infringe their rights by tracking their DNA against a bunch of it. Again, without any court order, without their acceptance and without their consent. And we tell you that this is wrong on a number of principal levels, and this is something which you shouldn't let go. Then let's look look at this last point very quickly. How is it exactly going to increase the governmental interference, and why is that bad for the private sphere of these persons? It so happens that there's a reason why the government isn't allowed free access, or the police isn't allowed free access to say your assets and your personal standing in society, simply because the government and the people as a whole know that what they do is essentially their right to in a country. Essentially, they're emancipated people. They're not slaves to be kept track of like cattle. So essentially, what happens is then the government is setting a precedent or a slippery slope through which essentially all these people are going to be tagged and they're going to be kept under tabs by the government at all points of time. What essentially happens then is that there is absolutely no freedom of movement. They have no freedom of expression, no freedom of professing any kind of opinion or thought which is contrary to what the government wants to do. And if this is the kind of policy which they actually want to run, then they really have to show us that there is some kind of certainly some smidgen of benefit coming out of this. We don't see this at all. We do not stand for a militarized or police state. We don't want these people to live in an environment of fear. Side governments must fall.